Are you looking to play your wildcard in Game Week 22, or do you just want to know who I think the best players in FPL at the moment are? Stick with me and I'll take you through my wildcard team. Okay, first up, my wildcard goalkeeper is Kepa. In my opinion, I think Chelsea have seemed to really turn things around defensively, and that all really comes from the signing of Badiashile. I think he's a great defender, slots him really nicely into that Chelsea team. He's great on the ball, great physically, good defensively. I think he's sure things up defensively for Chelsea, I really do. And looking at the future fixtures for Chelsea as well, not just in the short term, longer term, they've got some really nice games as well. And I think at £4.5 million, now Chelsea have seemed to turn things around. Obviously, the other good goalkeeper, in my opinion, is Nick Pope. But I think the price difference between Kepa and Pope now is substantial enough that I think Kepa is really worth a shout. And for that reason, he makes my wildcard team. My next players, I don't really think these two need much introduction. The only thing I would say with Luke Shaw is that he's missed the last two games for Man United. He's not even been in the squad. He did have an injury. Question is the manager just resting him against the lower opposition in the cup games, making sure he's absolutely bang fit for Crystal Palace and Leeds back in the Premier League? I think that could well be the case. And if it was a more serious injury for Shaw, we'd probably have heard about it by now. And Trippier, the guy doesn't need any explanation at all. He's the second highest scoring player in FPL. Absolutely essential for your team. He plays for the best defence in the league now in Newcastle, and he's only 6.1 million. You might find that if you look at all the players on face value, you might not be able to afford this wildcard team. And I've given you some options on a later slide to explain some players you could replace some with. But in my opinion, I think most people now have more than 100 million of team value, so these players are affordable. And to be honest, I imagine if you're watching this video, you probably already have Trippier in your team, so you're going to gain some value or keep some from him. But Trippier and Shaw, two defenders, don't really need much explanation. They should go straight into your team. Now, my next defender I actually think is quite a nice little differential, and that's Zinchenko. He looks to be the first choice left back for Arsenal, and from the games that I've seen of them with my eyes, he looks to be playing the most advanced of all the Arsenal defenders. He's the one that really gets forward, and you can see on his heat map there, I've just pasted over him. He basically plays in both halves equally. In fact, probably spends more time in the opposition half than he does his own, which suggests to me, as I said, he's playing in a really advanced position. And because he's not only just a left back, I think he was a centre midfielder when Man City signed him. He can get involved in any bit of play and make things happen. So for that reason, I think personally, Zinchenko is the standout of the Arsenal defence, purely because he gets forward, gets more involved in the attacks than anyone else. And yeah, he's only 7.9% owned. And at the moment, I think that's probably a lot of that is dead teams from the start of the season. Obviously, he picked up an injury earlier on in the season where active teams would have sold him, but non-active teams wouldn't. And I think he's lingering around in a few inactive teams. He's obviously got the double game week in 23. It's been confirmed that Arsenal don't blank in 28. So personally, I think it makes absolute sense to triple up on Arsenal, which you'll see who I've picked later on. And he's only 0.3 million more than White as well. And I think he's worth 0.3 million more as well. So Zinchenko is my pick of the Arsenal defenders. Okay, next up is Kevin De Bruyne. The guy doesn't really need any explanation. I don't even think in terms of underlying numbers he's the standout Man City player anymore. I just think he's the most nailed of the midfielders. And at the moment, looking at that Man City team, there are not three players really that you can say are nailed to play every game. Like previously, I would have said John Stones is the most nailed of the defenders, for example. But now he's picked up an injury. You just don't know how they're going to line up. For me, De Bruyne is the most nailed to start of all the Man City mids. His stats are really good. 0.7 expected returns per 90, 0.19 expected goals, 0.5 expected assists, and he's got a double game week in 23 against reasonably good opposition. Obviously, Arsenal is a really tough game, but Villa there, you could quite easily see him getting points against Villa. As for Arsenal, I think Man City are going to have to go for that game and try and win it. So De Bruyne, Haaland, they're going to be getting forward, trying to score some goals. So for that reason, I think you got to go for Kevin De Bruyne. Now, next up, I've gone for, in my opinion, the standout pick of the Arsenal midfielders, and that's Martin Odegaard. In terms of, the likes of Saka, Martinelli, and Odegaard, of course, he's leading the way in terms of underlying numbers. He's also the Arsenal club captain, so he's going to play pretty much every game that he's fit for. Same story with Zinchenko. He's got a double game week in 23, and he no longer blanks in game week 28. And as I said, his underlying numbers are the top of the Arsenal midfielders. So he's got 0.62 expected returns per 90, which is 0.32 expected goals and 0.3 expected assists. Those are fantastic numbers when you look at the rest of the league as well, which you just saw with Kevin De Bruyne. He's on 0.7 expected return. So Martin Odegaard, very close to Kevin De Bruyne, and he's nearly, I think he's over 5 million cheaper, nearly 6 million cheaper than De Bruyne. Look at those fixtures coming up for Arsenal as well. They're really favourable. You can see on the predicted points as well, he's predicted to return in pretty much all of those games according to DraftHound. For that reason, he's got to go in your team. Another Arsenal midfielder up next, and in my opinion, he's Arsenal's talisman, is Bukayo Saka. He's on the penalties. He's got consistent returns across the season. He scored 4. We've got 4 returns in his last 6 Premier League games. His stats are a little bit lower than Odegaard, but not by much at all. And to be honest, with the form that he's in at the moment, he could well start to either become level or overtake Odegaard in terms of those underlying numbers. 0.33 expected goals, 0.24 expected assists. Obviously, he's on the penalties for Arsenal as well. He's their main man. I think he's equally as nailed as Odegaard is. I'm starting to get a bit put off by Martinelli, and you'll see he's not actually in my wildcard team because he has Trossard as competition, but I don't think Odegaard or Saka really have competition for their positions anymore. And yeah, as I said with Odegaard, really favourable fixtures for Arsenal. They no longer blank in 28, obviously got the double in 23. I think Saka absolutely nailed in my wildcard team. No surprises with this guy either. Marcus Rashford, he's in absolutely red-hot form at the moment. He's got 10 goals, 2 assists in his last 10 games in all competitions. He's likely, he's going to double now. That's absolutely confirmed that he's going to double in 22. I don't know if you can play your wild card and triple captain at the same time actually, but I think personally he is a really good triple captain option for this week. Probably better actually than Haaland in game week 20. I think the fixtures are really favourable. They're both at home. He's in a really good run of form. Less owned than Haaland as well, so the points gained from a triple captain should benefit your rank more than you would if you had it on Haaland and he returned. I think he could well be on penalties now as well. Bruno gave him the last one when Bruno was on the pitch, and the last penalty before that Man United had, Bruno missed it, so he could well have transferred penalty responsibility over to Rashford. That remains to be seen, but it's just another string to Rashford's bow. I expect him to start both of those games in 22. He's just playing so well at the moment. I don't think the manager can bench him. He could well come off early, but I don't really think that matters too much. And for me, 7.2 million for a guy that scored 10 goals in his last 10 games. Absolutely ridiculous value. So Marcus Rashford, straight in your team. Next up is a man that I haven't owned all season in FPL, and he's killed me. I've got to say, Harry Kane. He's the second best premium asset in the game, in my opinion. I think he's been overshadowed by Haaland, really, but he is having an absolutely outstanding season for Spurs, especially in my opinion, considering how poorly Spurs have played in some of these games. Kane has just returned absolutely consistently. He's obviously nailed. He's probably literally one of the most nailed players to play in the Premier League. When he's injured, obviously he's not going to play, but every other time, he's going to play every game, and you can pretty much back him to play 90 minutes. So for that reason, he's probably the safest FPL pick in the game. He's got 0.73 expected returns per 90, which is really good, up there with De Bruyne. But yeah, I just think he's absolutely on fire at the moment. And I wouldn't let that Man City game put me off either. He's got a really good record against Man City. And of all the teams in the league, I'd suggest Tottenham are a little bit of a Man City bogey team. The way they set up to play on the counter really punishes Man City. And for that reason, I think Harry Kane should absolutely be in your wildcard team. I don't really need to say a lot about this guy, Erling Haaland. He's the highest scoring player in FPL this season. He's on track to break FPL records in terms of the highest scoring player in history, as well as the Premier League scoring record if he continues at the rate that he is. He's obviously got the double in 23 as well. Provides another triple captaincy option if you fancy using it. Bit of a risk, I guess, if he's going to play against Aston Villa, but you can totally back him to start in that Arsenal game. He leads, other than this week where there's a double that he's not part of, he leads the expected points figures every week. All the underlying numbers suggest that he's going to be the top scorer week on week. He's on pens, doesn't seem to really be getting rotated unless he's really tired or he's injured. Sometimes gets subbed off early, but he starts pretty much every game for Man City. And for me, there's no question he is absolutely essential for your team. And in 22, probably 23 as well, he is the best captain. So Erling Haaland, I don't really need to say any more. And then my final player is quite a fun one, really, and that's Willy Gnonto from Leeds. He didn't actually play in the FA Cup game the weekend just gone, but that was because he picked up a suspension. So the guy's fully fit, and I'm expecting him to play both games in 22. And after speaking to some hardcore Leeds fans as well, they just say with the level of performance that he's been putting in, they do expect him to play both of those games. He's a really bright and exciting prospect. Only 5 million, so if there are weeks that you don't fancy him, perhaps Man United in game week 23 is just a one-alone fixture, you can just bench him and be quite comfortable. He's got 4 returns in 8 starts in all competitions, which I think is really good, and he's only 5 million. For that reason, I think he's a great option for your team, and for this double game week as well, I just think he's a really fun pick as well, which in my opinion is partly what FPL is all about as well. Obviously, it's about getting points, but it's also about having fun. And I think Gnonto, he can really provide both of those. He's a really exciting player to watch, pretty low owned, and he's got a good chance of getting some returns against Forest and Man United as well. And my final screen is just showing you how that team looks together. I'm not going to go through the players that I've just gone through, but I've gone for Ward, Andreas, Botman and Bueno on the bench. I don't really think these guys need too much explanation. Ward, cheapest starting goalkeeper in the game. Andreas, always a hero when he comes off my bench. Sven Botman from Newcastle, arguably one of the best centre-backs in the league at the moment. And Newcastle, best defence in the league by far. They've got West Ham at home as their first fixture, so you could well justify starting him over maybe one of those outfield players. But yeah, I'd probably bench him for this week, but he's absolutely an option for when you don't fancy playing Gnonto. And then Bueno, cheapest defender in the game, really. I just think he can just rot there on third in the bench and come in when you really need him. And he does seem to be playing some minutes for Wolves. And then on the right there, you just see 4 players who I suggest are honourable mentions. They didn't quite make this team in the way that I've got it structured. But like I said, this might not fit your team value. You should be able to build this draft, I think, with just the average sort of value that players have accumulated. But if you haven't, there are some alternatives for each player as well. Now, I put in the thumbnail that I didn't fancy Bruno Fernandes. And to be honest, I don't really. I think his underlying numbers are still quite low. And I just don't know if he's a good option. And that's why I went for De Bruyne. But I completely respect people's opinions if they want to go with him. So I've left him there as an honourable mention. Maybe if you don't have the money to build this entire team, you could get rid of De Bruyne, go for Bruno Fernandes, and then maybe bring someone like Mahrez in for game week 23 when Man City double. Mahrez is in exceptional form as well, obviously. Bit more of a rotation risk than De Bruyne. But yeah, still a great option for 23. So maybe that's how you could play it if you can't quite afford this team. And I've gone for Mitoma. The guy's on absolute fire for Brighton at the moment. Post, I think, game week 27, there's going to be a number of blank game weeks where Brighton are expected to double, which makes him an even more attractive option. And the guy just looks ridiculously good. So even if you're not considering the doubles, he could well be that bench option in midfield for you. Nketiah, of all the Arsenal attacking players at the moment, he leads the way in terms of underlying numbers. The reason I've gone for Odegaard and Saka is I just think my front three is probably better and more suited to the way I want to play FPL. But I would absolutely have no question to argue someone if they went for Nketiah in their team. Based on the way he's been playing and their underlying numbers, I think he's a great pick, and especially, obviously, with that double in 23. And then my final one is a player that really hasn't paid off for me this season, but he's back in training, I believe, for Chelsea. Back to gaining fitness, and I think Graham Potter will ease him into the side. But Reece James, when Reece James is fit, you can never ignore him as an FPL option. And as I was saying, I think after the signing of Badiashile, Chelsea have really turned things around defensively, which means James obviously has got potential for attacking returns, but he can get back amongst the clean sheets as well. So I really do think if you want to take a punt, maybe you'll have to skip him in 22 and not play him and play him for 23 or later. But Reece James is a really exciting option, and I can't ignore him when looking at a wildcard draft. That's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think of the picks that I've made. If you agree, disagree, let me know in the comments. I'm not going to be precious or offended if you disagree. Different, as I say in every video, difference of opinion is what FPL is all about. I'm not going to be offended if you disagree with any of these picks. If you did enjoy the video, please leave me a like rating. I'd really appreciate it. Subscribe to the Golden Goal channel. You can set the bell to be notified whenever we upload an FPL video. I'll be planning to bring out a few more before the Game Week 22 deadline, as well as the deadline stream on deadline day itself. I'll see you in the next video.